Hello everyone, Alan Sens here, and welcome to this segment on the decision to drop the bomb. I hope you enjoy it. Let's get started. So here are the learning objectives for this particular segment. There's really only one. By the time we're done, you should be able to explain the motives for dropping the atomic bombs on Japan. There was opposition to dropping the bomb on Japan. The motives behind this opposition were captured in a petition drafted by Leo Szilard in July of 1945 and signed by 155 Manhattan Project scientists. It asked President Truman to consider a demonstration of the power of the bomb first, before using it against people. Szilard hoped that the mere threat of using such weapons would force Japan to surrender. The last paragraph of the petition to Truman states, "We, the undersigned, respectfully petition, first, that you exercise your power as Commander-in-Chief to rule that the United States shall not resort to the use of atomic bombs in this war unless the terms which will be imposed upon Japan have been made public in detail, and Japan, knowing these terms, has refused to surrender. And second, that in such an event, the question whether or not to use atomic bombs be decided by you in light of the considerations presented in this petition, as well as all the other moral responsibilities which are involved." Unfortunately, the petition never made it through the chain of command to President Truman, and it's not clear that it would have had much of an impact anyway. Not all of the Manhattan Project scientists agreed with Szilard. Here was Edward Teller's response to the Szilard petition. "First of all, let me say that I have no hope of clearing my conscience. The things we are working on are so terrible that no amount of protesting or fiddling with politics will save our souls. I do not feel that there is any chance to outlaw one weapon. If we have a slim chance of survival, it lies in the possibility to get rid of wars. The more decisive the weapon is, the more surely it will be used in any real conflicts, and no agreements will help." General Groves, the director of the Manhattan Project, sought to uncover evidence of unlawful behavior or treason against Szilard. Groves felt that his petition was evidence that Szilard was not a reliable supporter of the nuclear weapons program or the Manhattan Project. In fact, most of the scientists who signed the petition lost their jobs in the Manhattan Project and on weapons work. Despite some opposition, there was nevertheless considerable support for using the bomb against Japan. What were the motives behind the dropping of the bombs? The first motive was the desire to force Japan to surrender without having to mount an invasion of the Japanese home islands. By early 1945, Japan was essentially defeated. Its navy and air force was destroyed, it was encircled by a naval blockade, and it was under constant air attack. This map shows the extent of the Japanese Empire, the maximum expansion, if you will, of the Japanese military during World War II. And you can see the very large geographic extent of Japanese expansion. But by the time World War II was entering its second phase, the British were advancing this direction here through Burma. The Americans were advancing up through to the Philippines, and they were also advancing through the islands in the Pacific towards Japan. And so by late 1944, early 1945, Japan's geographic extent in terms of its military control over regions was really restricted to a much smaller area, and it was essentially by this time, for all intents and purposes, a defeated country. Why then did Japan refuse to surrender? The government of Japan continued to fight in the hopes it could gain compromises in any peace negotiations, especially the preservation of Japan's system of government and the preservation of the power of the emperor. The Japanese government hoped to inflict such high casualties on U.S. forces in any invasion of the Japanese home islands that the US government would compromise on the terms of Japan's surrender. The US had already suffered very heavy casualties in a series of battles close to the Japanese home islands, particularly Iwo Jima and Okinawa. This map shows American plans for the invasion of the home islands, and during the preparations for this invasion, estimates of the casualty totals were very high. President Truman estimated that as many as 500,000 Americans would be killed in the invasion. Some of his advisors suggested a more accurate figure would be 1 million. Winston Churchill estimated that 1.5 million American and British soldiers would be killed in an invasion of the home islands. The prospect of these casualties was a powerful driver behind the decision to use the bomb. A second rationale or motive for dropping the bomb was the bomb's shock value. Many believed that the Japanese population had adjusted to the steady decline in living standards due to conventional bombing raids, but the sudden shock and surprise of an atomic bomb would lead to Japanese surrender. This is a big reason why Szilard's demonstration idea was discounted, because a demonstration would remove the element of surprise and shock. Another motive was the desire to send a powerful message, a signal, if you will, to the world in general, and the Soviet Union in particular. It was felt that the bomb had to be used against a real target to be, quote, internationally recognized, close quote, as the Target Committee put it. Already, the Truman government had clashed with Stalin's Soviet Union on a variety of matters, and suspicion between the US and the Soviet Union was growing. Using the bomb would reinforce post-war American diplomacy. Another motive may have been racism. Dehumanization of the enemy, so common in war generally, may have been a factor in the decision to drop the bomb. Racial depictions of Japanese during the war were not positive. This poster is a comparatively mild example, and you can see that the use of language in the depiction serves the purpose of dehumanizing the enemy. It's very possible that this sense of dehumanization and racism that was connected to it was also a factor in the decision to drop the bomb. Finally, there was a financial justification. The bomb had cost approximately $2 billion US to develop. Some felt it needed to be dropped to justify this investment. Until recently, history has been kind to those who made the decision to drop the bomb. Sir Winston Churchill's own rationale was largely accepted for a long time. As he put it, to avert a vast indefinite butchery, to bring the war to an end, to give peace to the world, to lay healing hands upon its tortured peoples by a manifestation of overwhelming power at the cost of a few explosions, seemed, after all our toils and perils, a miracle of deliverance. I hope now you have a good sense of what the motives were for dropping the atomic bombs on Japan. Okay, now obviously this is not an easy subject to think about. It is not a pleasant subject to think about. What is worth remembering, though, in addition to the motives behind the dropping of the bomb, is that the decision makers then were gripped in a certain political environment and were making decisions in that environment. Any future decisions to use nuclear weapons will be motivated by a set of political conditions and a set of political motives that will be extremely important in how that bomb is used, how many of them are used, when they are used, and so on. By examining the nature of the decision to drop the bomb against Japan in World War II, we have insights into how we might avoid the prospect of having these weapons used once again. I hope you enjoyed this video. We'll see you again soon.